The room still smelled like burnt espresso and overheated servers when Lena slid the exit papers across the glass table with steady hands. Nobody noticed she left one email unopened in her archive until 3 days later when airports froze, hospitals lost access, and 14 countries discovered the company's most valuable AI engine legally belonged to no one at all. The AI team meeting began at 8:03 a.m., 3 minutes late and already hostile. Rain dragged silver lines across the panoramic windows of the 32nd floor, while the city below dissolved into a blur of brake lights and umbrellas. Screens glowed blue around the conference room, like cold aquarium glass. Half-drunk coffee stood beside mechanical keyboards. Somebody's smartwatch vibrated every few seconds against the polished table, nervous as a trapped insect. Lena arrived carrying two things, her laptop and a notebook filled with handwritten system diagrams nobody else could fully read. The new CTO arrived carrying confidence sharp enough to cut oxygen out of the room. Victor Hale didn't sit immediately. He liked standing when delivering criticism, as if gravity itself worked for him. His charcoal suit looked expensive in the way corporate power always tried to look effortless. Behind him, the quarterly AI adoption dashboard glimmered on the wall-sized screen. Green metrics, rising curves, investor-friendly optimism. And hidden beneath all that polished success was a system held together by Lena's architecture. Victor tapped the display with a laser pointer. "Our latency problem is unacceptable," he said. "Competitors are deploying faster adaptation layers every week." Nobody answered. Not because they agreed, because everyone in the room knew the infrastructure had already been stretched beyond safe limits 2 months ago. Victor turned toward Lena. "You built the core orchestration pipeline, right?" She nodded once. The room became strangely quiet. Even the air conditioning sounded distant. Victor smiled the way executives smile before they ruin someone's morning. "Then maybe you can explain why your team moves like it's still 2019. A few people looked down immediately. One engineer pretended to adjust his monitor settings. Another suddenly became fascinated by his coffee lid. Lena remained still. Victor continued. "We're entering an AI acceleration era. Speed matters now. Adaptation matters now." He folded his arms. "Frankly, Lena, you're too slow for AI." The sentence landed harder because he said it casually, not shouting, not angry, just clean public humiliation delivered with surgical precision. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere near the back of the room and died instantly. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline like furniture dragged across heaven. Lena felt heat rise behind her ribs, but her expression barely changed. Years in corporate engineering had taught her that embarrassment was often a spectator sport. The moment you reacted emotionally, the audience leaned closer, so she opened her notebook calmly. "Would you like the technical explanation?" she asked softly, "or the investor version?" Several heads lifted. Victor's smile tightened by half an inch. "That sarcasm," he replied, "is exactly the problem." Another silence, longer this time, dangerous, because everyone in the room suddenly understood two things at once. Victor underestimated her, and Lena was deciding whether to fight back. She didn't. That surprised them most. Instead, she connected her laptop to the display and brought up infrastructure logs. Cascading diagnostic windows flooded the screen. Server strain forecasts, synchronization bottlenecks, regional overload probabilities. The data looked like a patient quietly describing a future heart attack. "We're processing traffic beyond certified scaling thresholds," Lena explained. "The adaptive language routing layer hasn't been stabilized for multi-region redundancy." Victor interrupted immediately. "Translation? You approved deployment before the architecture was finished." A sharp inhale moved around the table. Not dramatic, not loud, but enough. Victor walked slowly toward the screen. "You engineers always confuse caution with intelligence?" "And executives," Lena replied, "often confuse momentum with gravity." Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Victor noticed. That was the exact second the meeting stopped being about infrastructure. Now it was personal. He stepped closer. "We hired me to modernize this company," he said, "not babysit legacy thinkers afraid of iteration." Legacy thinker. The phrase hung in the room like smoke. Lena stared at the outage probability chart glowing behind him. Red warning clusters blinked across Europe and Southeast Asia like tiny emergency flares. She remembered the night she designed the first orchestration model 4 years earlier. Back then, the company had rented half a floor and celebrated stable uptime with supermarket champagne. She had slept beside servers during winter storms. She had rebuilt critical routing modules from hospital waiting rooms while her father underwent surgery. Now investors used phrases like AI revolution, while people who barely understood the architecture called her slow. Funny how success erased fingerprints. Victor clicked to the next slide. A restructuring chart appeared. Her name was highlighted in gray. The room temperature seemed to drop. We're streamlining development leadership, Victor announced. Effective immediately, orchestration oversight transitions to the rapid deployment division. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Lena looked at the chart for exactly 3 seconds. Then she closed her notebook. One quiet motion, like the end of a conversation. Victor finally sat down. HR entered almost immediately after, which told everyone this had been planned before the meeting even started. A woman named Claire carried a thin black folder against her chest like something fragile. She avoided eye contact with Lena while distributing printed documents around the table. Exit papers. The phrase alone felt cruelly theatrical. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Somewhere far below, ambulance sirens dissolved into traffic noise. Victor leaned back in his chair. This transition package is generous. Lena opened the folder. Severance terms, non-disclosure clauses, equipment return instructions, and one additional document. Patent assignment confirmation? There it was, buried halfway through the stack like a poisoned needle. The orchestration engine. Her orchestration engine, the one she had designed before the company's valuation exploded into the billions. Claire finally spoke, carefully rehearsed. We just need signatures today so legal can finalize ownership alignment. Ownership alignment. Corporate language always tried to perfume greed. Lena scanned the pages slowly while the room pretended not to watch her. Victor checked his phone. Someone shifted uncomfortably nearby. Another engineer suddenly became very interested in taking notes that no longer mattered. Lena reached the patent section and stopped, just for a second. Tiny, almost invisible, but enough to notice if someone was truly paying attention. The assignment referenced an attachment confirmation email, except the attachment ID field was blank, a small omission, microscopic, the kind executives never noticed because executives rarely read anything engineers wrote. Lena looked up calmly. When was this prepared? Claire hesitated. Late last night. Of course it was. Rushed, sloppy, dangerous. Victor sighed dramatically. Can we not make this difficult? Lightning flashed beyond the glass walls, bleaching the room white for a heartbeat. Lena picked up the pen. Everyone watched. She signed the exit papers first, then the confidentiality agreement, then the equipment return acknowledgement. But when she reached the patent assignment page, she quietly set it aside beneath the folder without a word. The motion was smooth enough that almost nobody noticed. Almost. Raj from infrastructure noticed. His eyes widened slightly. Lena closed the folder. That should cover everything, she said. Claire looked relieved immediately. Victor looked victorious, and both reactions told Lena exactly how little attention they had actually paid. She stood, collected her notebook, and unplugged her laptop from the conference room display. The massive dashboard vanished from the wall, leaving only reflections of tired employees staring back at themselves. For one strange moment, the room looked less like a tech company and more like survivors waiting inside an airport during a storm delay. Victor gave a final smile. No hard feelings. Lena finally smiled back. That unsettled him more than anger would have, because her smile carried no defeat at all, only exhaustion. And something else, something quiet, something patient. She walked toward the door while thunder rolled again over the city. Just before leaving, she paused beside the glass wall overlooking the engineering floor below. Hundreds of monitors flickered beneath dim industrial lights, tiny islands of code floating in corporate darkness, a beautiful machine built by people nobody remembered until disaster arrived. Then she left. No slammed door, no speech, no revenge, just the soft click of heels disappearing down the hallway. 3 floors below, in the parking garage, her phone vibrated once. A system alert. Regional synchronization instability detected. Lena stared at the notification while rainwater rippled across the concrete outside. Then another alert appeared, and another. She slowly looked upward toward the tower, disappearing into storm clouds. For the first time all morning, she whispered one sentence aloud. They deployed it already. What happened during the next 72 hours would make international headlines, and one forgotten email would become the most expensive oversight in the company's history. By midnight, the tower looked like a stranded cruise ship floating above the city. Entire floors remained lit while rain lashed the windows in restless waves. From the street below, the company headquarters still projected confidence. Bright logos, polished glass, giant digital banners promising adaptive intelligence for a connected world. Inside, panic had already begun whispering through the walls. Lena watched the building from a small 24-hour cafe across the avenue, her untouched tea cooling beside the window. The place smelled of cinnamon, burnt sugar, and wet coats drying over chairbacks. Students hunched over laptops under amber lights. Delivery drivers shuffled in and out carrying rainwater on their boots. Nobody there knew 14 countries were balancing on a technical fault line. Her phone buzzed again. Raj. She stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "You saw the alerts," he said immediately, voice low and tense. "I saw enough. They pushed the autonomous routing patch live." Lena closed her eyes briefly. Of course they did. Victor never believed in brakes, only acceleration. "That patch was still sandboxed," she said quietly. "I know." Outside, headlights smeared across flooded pavement like melted gold. Raj lowered his voice further. "The regional balancing system is desynchronizing. Europe keeps rerouting traffic into Southeast Asia. Singapore's nodes are overheating." Lena leaned back slowly. The orchestration engine had always behaved like weather. Beautiful when balanced, catastrophic when forced. Who approved production release? Silence. That silence answered everything. Victor, again. Lena glanced through the rain toward the glowing headquarters tower. Somewhere inside, executives were probably reassuring investors with polished vocabulary and optimistic dashboards, while engineers fought small, invisible fires beneath the surface. Corporate optimism had a very specific smell, like expensive cologne sprayed inside a burning kitchen. "You need to tell them to roll back," Raj whispered. "They won't listen to me anymore." Another pause. Then Raj said the one thing neither of them wanted to admit. "They should." The cafe door opened behind her. Cold wind curled through the room, carrying the scent of wet asphalt. A couple entered, laughing softly, shaking rain from their umbrellas, completely untouched by the chaos unfolding above their city. Lena suddenly envied ordinary evenings. She remembered when building software still felt creative instead of political, when engineers debated architecture instead of survival, when people said team and meant it. Raj exhaled sharply into the phone. "There's more." That sentence tightened something inside her chest immediately. What happened? The fallback model started generating unstable inference loops during high-load translation requests. Lena sat upright. "No," she said instantly. "That's impossible. It's happening." Her mind moved fast now, reconstructing systems like collapsing bridges in reverse. The orchestration engine dynamically redirected workloads between language regions. If synchronization timing drifted during overload conditions, recursive inference behavior could emerge across mirrored nodes. Tiny delay, tiny duplication, then exponential instability, a digital avalanche. And Victor had deployed the unfinished adaptive patch globally. Rain hammered harder against the cafe windows. Lena spoke carefully. "How many regions?" Raj hesitated. "Right now, 4. Not yet catastrophic, but close enough to smell it." She opened her laptop immediately. Reflex, instinct, years of emergency response carved into muscle memory. Her local diagnostic mirrors still contained archived telemetry access. Not illegal, not unauthorized, simply forgotten. Just like the patent assignment email. The screen illuminated her face pale blue, while lines of system data streamed downward. Error spikes, routing oscillations, escalating latency, and beneath it all, something worse. The stabilizer protocols she personally designed had been partially removed. Not broken, removed, intentionally. Lena stared at the code revision logs in disbelief. Victor's Rapid Deployment Division had disabled safety throttles to improve response speed. For investor demos, for benchmark optics, for presentation slides. A hollow laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The student at the next table glanced over nervously. Raj heard it through the phone. "What? He removed the governor layers?" A long silence followed. Then came a quiet curse from Raj, exhausted and horrified. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline again, lower this time, almost intimate. Lena's screen flashed red. New region instability detected. Brazil, then Germany, then South Korea. One by one, warning indicators bloomed across the interface like spreading cracks in ice. Her pulse slowed strangely instead of accelerating. Not calm, never calm, just clarity, the kind that arrives moments before impact. "Listen carefully," she said. "If synchronization variance crosses 17%, the mirrored nodes will start recursively amplifying corrupted context memory." Raj inhaled sharply. "How bad?" "Very." Another engineer suddenly joined the call remotely. Maya from Infrastructure Resilience. Her voice arrived breathless through speaker static. "Lena, thank God. Nobody can stabilize the rerouting logic?" In the background, she could hear alarms, overlapping conversations, keyboards striking at desperate speed, the sound of a company discovering consequences in real time. Victor's voice echoed faintly somewhere behind Maya, demanding updates, demanding timelines, demanding certainty from systems he barely understood. Maya lowered her tone. He thinks it's just temporary overload. Lena looked at the growing map of failures. It stopped being temporary an hour ago. A server cluster dropped offline in Tokyo, then another in Toronto. The dashboard pulsed crimson. The cafe television changed suddenly from sports highlights to breaking international news banners. Global AI service interruptions reported. The anchor spoke calmly, but the scrolling headlines underneath carried the first tremors of something much larger. Airport translation kiosks offline, emergency logistics delays, financial automation instability, hospitals reverting to manual systems in several regions. Inside the cafe, nobody paid much attention yet. People rarely recognize the beginning of a disaster. It always arrives dressed like inconvenience first. Maya spoke again. There's something else. Lena almost laughed from exhaustion. Of course there was. The legal department is asking for your patent transfer confirmation? There it was, the real panic finally surfacing beneath the technical crisis. Not just servers, ownership, liability, control. Lena closed her eyes briefly. In her memory, she could still see the blank attachment ID field on the assignment form. Tiny omission, tiny arrogance. The company assumed possession before securing it. Victor assumed pressure created obedience. Legal assumed paperwork was complete because someone important said it was. And now the orchestration engine powering half their infrastructure existed inside a terrifying gray zone. Maya's voice trembled slightly. You did sign it, right? Lena looked through the rain toward the glowing headquarters tower, where entire executive floors remained illuminated like emergency beacons. She answered honestly, I signed the exit papers. Silence exploded across the call. Nobody breathed. In the background, someone shouted for updated latency reports. Another voice demanded emergency rollback approval. Somewhere far away, glass shattered. Raj spoke first. You're telling me the patent assignment email attachment was never finalized, Maya whispered. Oh my God. Outside, lightning split the sky so brightly the entire cafe flashed white. And for one heartbeat, Lena saw her own reflection in the window. Not victorious, not angry, just tired. Tired of watching brilliant people treated like replaceable hardware. Tired of executives gambling with systems they didn't respect. Tired of being called slow by people sprinting toward cliffs. Her screen erupted with fresh alerts. 12 countries now affected, then 13. A moment later, the number became 14. The cafe television volume rose as more customers started paying attention. Financial analysts appeared, government statements, transportation disruptions, global outage. The phrase spread fast because fear always does. Raj's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. They're bringing in external counsel. Lena already knew what the lawyers would find. A missing assignment chain, an untransferred patent, an AI orchestration core legally tied to its creator instead of the corporation using it worldwide, the most expensive unchecked email in company history. And somewhere high above the storm, inside a conference room still glowing with emergency lights, Victor Hale was probably realizing that speed and control were never the same thing. By dawn, every executive in the building would understand the terrifying difference. Somebody in that tower was about to open the wrong inbox, and nothing afterward would feel stable again. If you think this was the moment the company collapsed, you're still underestimating how dangerous silence can become when the right person finally stops protecting a system. Have you ever seen a company destroy itself this fast? Tell me whose side you're on after that meeting. At 4:17 a.m., the executive floor stopped pretending everything was under control. The confidence disappeared first. Not publicly, of course. Public confidence survives long after private panic arrives. But inside the glass conference rooms overlooking the sleeping city, ties loosened, voices sharpened, and every polished corporate sentence slowly transformed into fear, wearing expensive clothing. The storm outside had weakened into cold, drifting rain. The storm inside the building had not. Lena sat alone in her apartment kitchen with the lights off, except for the glow of 3 monitors reflecting across dark countertops. Steam curled from untouched coffee. Beyond the windows, the city looked washed clean and exhausted, like a boxer after too many rounds. Her phone had not stopped vibrating for nearly an hour. Legal, executives, unknown numbers, she ignored them all. Not out of revenge, out of caution. There is a moment during every corporate disaster when people stop searching for solutions and begin searching for responsibility. Lena knew that moment had arrived the second external counsel entered the building because lawyers ask quieter questions than executives, and quieter questions are usually more dangerous. Another incoming call appeared. Claire from HR Lena let it ring twice before answering. Claire sounded nothing like the carefully composed woman from the exit meeting. Her voice now carried the thin cracks of someone standing too close to panic. Lena, they need to speak with you. They had that opportunity yesterday. A pause. In the background, Lena could hear overlapping voices, hurried footsteps, printers running nonstop, the soundtrack of institutional fear. Claire lowered her tone. Legal discovered the assignment chain is incomplete. Discovered? Lena repeated softly. The irony almost tasted bitter enough to laugh at. Claire continued quickly, words tumbling together now. The attachment confirmation was never executed through final acknowledgement protocol. That's correct. And the orchestration patent still belongs to me. Silence. Not shocked silence anymore. The worst kind. Confirmed silence. Rainwater slid slowly down Lena's apartment windows, while several blocks away the company tower glowed like a stranded lighthouse, no longer certain where the rocks were. Claire exhaled shakily. They want to negotiate. Lena stared at the city. Negotiate. Interesting word. Yesterday they called her obsolete. Now they wanted diplomacy. What exactly are they negotiating? Lena asked. Another hesitation. That depends on whether you intend to enforce ownership rights. There it was. The real terror finally spoken aloud. Not the outage, not the headlines. Control. The orchestration engine wasn't just software anymore. It powered international logistics, financial systems, emergency translation frameworks, transportation routing, an invisible nervous system stretched across continents. And legally, the foundation underneath it belonged to the woman they escorted out with a cardboard box and exit papers. Lena closed her laptop slowly. You should be talking to your deployment team, she said. Not me. Claire's voice became smaller. They can't stabilize it. That sentence lingered in the dark kitchen. Heavy, human. Because underneath the corporate arrogance and executive theater, real engineers were still inside that building trying desperately to prevent larger damage. And Lena knew exactly how that felt. She remembered sleeping beneath server racks during launch failures years earlier. She remembered missing birthdays, canceled vacations, emergency calls at 2 a.m., entire winters measured by outage reports and code revisions. The company had treated her like a bottleneck, but the infrastructure still carried her fingerprints everywhere. Her phone buzzed again before Claire could continue. Raj, then Maya, then another unknown executive number. The pressure wave was building. Claire spoke carefully. Victor says this situation can still be contained. That finally made Lena smile. Not happily, just tired. Victor thinks gravity is a branding problem. Claire didn't answer. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled faintly over the city one last time before dawn. Then another notification appeared on Lena's monitor. Emergency government inquiry requested. She stared at it silently. The outage had crossed from corporate disaster into international scrutiny. That changed everything. Because companies can hide mistakes. Governments tend to document them. Lena stood and walked toward the window overlooking the sleeping streets below. Delivery trucks moved through wet intersections. Early commuters drifted beneath umbrellas. Somewhere, a bakery had already opened, warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk. Ordinary life continuing beside extraordinary collapse. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass. She looked exhausted, but steady. That mattered more. The phone call with Claire ended quietly after another round of nervous requests for cooperation and professional dialogue. Corporate language always became strangely polite once liability entered the room. The second the line disconnected, Raj called again. This time, Lena answered immediately. You need to see this, he said. His voice carried something new now, not panic, disbelief. He sent a secure file transfer link. Lena opened it. Internal executive messages flooded her screen, time-stamped, archived, unfiltered. Victor's directives appeared one after another, like gasoline trails leading toward a fire. Remove safety throttles for demo performance. Delay stability review until post-launch. Full deployment by Friday, regardless of engineering concerns. Lena read the messages twice, then once more. Outside, dawn slowly painted the clouds pale silver. Raj spoke carefully. He overrode 3 infrastructure objections. How did you get these? Someone forwarded them to the resilience team anonymously? Anonymous? Interesting. Because loyalty inside collapsing systems evaporates quickly, especially when careers become survival calculations. Lena continued reading. Another message appeared further down. A legal reminder sent 2 weeks earlier regarding incomplete patent transfer verification. Ignored. Not delayed. Ignored. Her chest tightened slightly at that. Not because she wanted revenge, because the entire disaster suddenly looked avoidable, painfully avoidable. One executive's ego, one rushed deployment, one unsigned transfer chain, millions of people now affected because powerful men kept confusing urgency with intelligence. Raj lowered his voice. External counsel is tearing through documentation right now. And? They're asking who knew the patent status was unresolved. Lena's gaze hardened slightly. That question mattered, because knowledge creates liability, and liability inside corporations spreads like smoke beneath doors. Another alert flashed across her screen. Partial stabilization attempts failed, global recovery estimates extending, financial markets reacting. The machine was no longer stumbling. Now it was bleeding publicly. Raj inhaled sharply. You know what's coming next, right? Lena did. Executives would protect themselves first, always. The narrative battle was about to begin. Who warned whom? Who approved what? Who ignored which risk? And somewhere in the middle of all that noise stood a quiet engineer holding something nobody could manufacture overnight. Proof, not revenge, proof. She suddenly remembered the exact expression on Victor's face during the AI team meeting when he called her slow. Not confidence, performance. There was a difference. Real expertise rarely needed an audience. The city outside brightened slowly as sunrise dissolved the storm clouds into pale gold streaks above the skyline. Beautiful morning, terrible day. Then Maya called. The moment Lena heard her breathing, she knew something had changed again. What happened? Lena asked immediately. Maya spoke in a whisper. Counsel just entered Victor's office. A pause, then they closed the door. Lena looked back toward the distant headquarters tower glowing against the dawn. Somewhere high inside that building, polished careers were beginning to crack under fluorescent light. And for the first time since the outage began, she realized the company wasn't afraid of the system failing anymore. They were afraid of the paper trail. By noon, the headquarters lobby looked less like a technology company and more like the scene of an approaching evacuation. Security badges failed intermittently as overloaded systems rippled through internal infrastructure. Journalists clustered behind temporary barriers outside the revolving doors, umbrellas tilted against steady drizzle, cameras pointed upward like surveillance towers waiting for confession. Employees moved through the marble lobby carrying laptops against their chests with the protective instinct people usually reserve for valuables or children. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Fear had finally become visible. Lena watched the live news coverage from a quiet corner booth inside a small riverside restaurant nearly 40 minutes away from downtown. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Plates clinked gently in the background. The scent of rosemary and fresh bread floated through warm air, untouched by corporate collapse. The contrast felt surreal. One part of the city was eating lunch. Another part was trying to survive itself. Her tea arrived untouched again. That made 3 cups since yesterday. The waiter gave her a sympathetic smile before disappearing toward the kitchen. On the television mounted above the bar, financial analysts dissected the outage with the excitement of people safely distant from consequences. Market confidence continues declining? International dependency concerns? Potential intellectual property complications? That last phrase lingered. Complications. Interesting choice of word for a billion-dollar legal catastrophe. Lena muted the television with the remote resting on her table. Silence felt cleaner. Her laptop remained open beside her plate, lines of infrastructure telemetry flowing endlessly downward. The outages had stabilized in some regions overnight, but stabilization was not recovery. The orchestration engine still behaved like an injured nervous system, reactive, fragile, unpredictable. Then her encrypted inbox flashed. External counsel requesting formal meeting. She stared at the message for several seconds. Attached beneath it sat a second file. Confidential settlement proposal. Lena almost smiled. 24 hours ago, they escorted her out with exit papers. Now they were sending legal envoys. Power changes posture very quickly when invoices become existential. She opened the attachment slowly. The offer was enormous. Retention compensation, emergency consulting authority, equity restoration, full public acknowledgement of architectural ownership, enough money to permanently alter several generations of ordinary lives. And yet the number itself barely interested her. What caught her attention was the tone. No arrogance, no executive sharpness. No language about legacy thinkers, just legal caution wrapped carefully around desperation. Outside the restaurant windows, the river moved dark and slow beneath the cloudy afternoon sky. Boats drifted quietly past wet embankments while traffic crawled across distant bridges. The city kept breathing. Corporations always believed they were permanent until the world continued without them for a few frightening hours. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. This time she answered. Lena Mercer speaking. A calm male voice replied immediately. This is Daniel Cho from External Counsel. Professional, controlled, precise. Lawyers spoke the way surgeons held scalpels. Thank you for taking the call, he continued. I believe we both understand the urgency of the situation. Lena leaned back in the booth. I understand the infrastructure situation, she corrected gently. Urgency arrived yesterday. Your company simply ignored it. Silence briefly occupied the line. Not offended silence. Measured silence. Daniel adjusted his approach instantly. I reviewed the deployment records personally, he said, and I'd prefer honesty over performance if we continue this conversation. That sentence interested her. Most corporate representatives still tried to preserve illusion first. This one sounded tired already. Then honesty works? Lena replied. Another pause. Finally, Daniel said quietly, the patent assignment was never completed. There it is. No one internally disputes that anymore. Rain tapped softly against the restaurant windows, while nearby diners continued eating without realizing global infrastructure negotiations were unfolding 3 tables away beside untouched tea. Daniel continued carefully. The board would like cooperative resolution before regulatory escalation increases. Translation. Before governments start asking uglier questions. Lena looked again at the settlement proposal glowing across her screen. Cooperative resolution? Such elegant language for panic. What exactly does the board believe they're resolving? She asked. Daniel answered with surprising directness. They're trying to prevent collapse. Not dramatic collapse, not stock price collapse, operational collapse, trust collapse, the dangerous kind. Because once governments and enterprise clients lose faith in critical AI infrastructure, recovery becomes reputation surgery, and reputation heals slower than software. Lena studied the rain sliding down the glass beside her table. She thought about the engineers still trapped inside emergency calls and sleepless stabilization loops. Raj, Maya, hundreds of exhausted people carrying consequences created far above their pay grades. This was the part outsiders never understood. Corporate disasters rarely hurt executives first. They hurt workers. Daniel spoke again. May I ask something candidly? Go ahead. Why didn't you mention the assignment issue during termination? Lena looked out toward the gray river. Because they never asked carefully enough. Because arrogance makes people skim details. Because after years of being ignored, silence starts feeling more truthful than arguments. But what she finally said was simpler. I assumed competent leadership reviewed its own legal documents. Daniel exhaled softly. Not amusement. Recognition. Somewhere behind him, she could hear muffled conversation and hurried movement. Crisis rooms all sound alike after enough hours? Air conditioning, printers, coffee cups, nervous pacing? Then another voice suddenly erupted faintly through his background speaker. Victor, sharp, angry, fractured. I don't care what legal says. The line muted instantly. Too late. Lena heard enough. Interesting. Victor no longer sounded authoritative. He sounded cornered. That difference mattered more than headlines. Daniel returned a moment later, calmer than before. My apologies. No need. A longer silence followed now. Careful. Evaluating. Like both sides suddenly understood this conversation was no longer about money. It was about narrative. Who built the system? Who endangered it? Who warned whom? And most importantly, who documented everything. Lena opened another archived folder quietly while Daniel waited. Time-stamped engineering objections, safety recommendations, deployment risk assessments, dozens of them, ignored every single one. A paper trail not of revenge, but responsibility. The restaurant lights reflected softly across her monitor, while outside the rain finally began easing into mist. The storm over the city was ending. The storm inside the company had only reached its center. Daniel's voice lowered slightly. There's one more development you should know. Lena's eyes narrowed faintly. What development? The board placed Victor Hale on temporary administrative leave this morning. There it was. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just inevitability arriving in formal language. Lena felt strangely empty hearing it. Because despite everything, this was never personal in the way people imagined. She hadn't tried to destroy him. He simply accelerated faster than reality could tolerate. Outside, a pale stripe of sunlight finally broke through the clouds and spilled across the river like molten metal. For the first time in 2 days, the city looked almost peaceful again. Then Daniel delivered the final sentence quietly. And internal investigators would like access to your archived emails? Lena stared at the screen, at the untouched settlement proposal, at the blinking infrastructure reports, at the single preserved thread containing the unfinished patent assignment confirmation. One forgotten email, one unchecked attachment, one moment executives believed details belonged to other people. Somewhere downtown, cameras still waited outside the headquarters tower, while employees avoided eye contact in elevators and lawyers searched conference rooms for missing accountability. But Lena suddenly understood something strange. The company was no longer trying to save its technology. It was trying to survive the truth. 3 weeks later, the city finally stopped talking about the outage every hour. Now people discussed it quietly instead, in elevators, inside airport lounges, across expensive restaurants where executives lowered their voices whenever someone mentioned AI regulation or infrastructure trust. Newspapers called it a historic systems failure. Financial channels called it a governance disaster. Online forums called it exactly what engineers had privately feared for years: a company run by presentation speed instead of technical reality. The tower downtown still stood exactly where it always had: glass walls reflecting clouds, and evening sunlight with polished indifference. But something invisible inside it had changed permanently. Confidence no longer lived there, only caution. Lena noticed it immediately the first morning she returned. Not as an employee, as an independent systems advisor under a temporary international stabilization contract negotiated through external counsel and regulatory observers. The irony would have been funny if so many people hadn't nearly lost everything. Security greeted her differently now, too politely. Receptionists stood straighter. Executives suddenly remembered eye contact. Engineers looked relieved in the quiet, exhausted way survivors recognize someone who speaks the same language after a disaster. Nobody mentioned the AI team meeting. Nobody repeated Victor's sentence. But ghosts do not disappear just because buildings stay standing. Rain drifted softly across the city again that morning, coating the windows in silver patterns, while emergency infrastructure teams worked through final recovery audits upstairs. The air inside headquarters smelled faintly of printer toner, fresh carpet cleaning, and burnt coffee from too many sleepless nights. Corporate recovery always carried the scent of exhaustion, pretending to be professionalism. Lena walked through the engineering floor slowly. The room sounded different now. Less performance, more listening. Monitors still glowed in endless rows beneath industrial ceiling lights, but conversations had changed tone. Engineers questioned assumptions openly. Deployment reviews moved slower. Legal teams attended infrastructure briefings without pretending documentation was optional. Painful lessons, expensive lessons, usually the only kind corporations truly remembered. Raj spotted her first near the central operations hub. For a second, he looked uncertain whether to smile or apologize for surviving the storm inside the building. Eventually, he settled on tired honesty. "You came back." "Temporarily," Lena replied. "That still counts." Nearby, Maya leaned back from her workstation with visible relief. "You have any idea how strange this place became after everything?" Lena glanced around. Half the executive offices upstairs remained dark behind frosted glass. Several names had already disappeared from internal directories entirely. New compliance procedures covered whiteboards where marketing growth projections used to dominate discussions. She answered carefully. "I think the building finally hurt itself." Maya laughed quietly at that. Not happy laughter, the kind people release after surviving pressure too long. Across the operations wall, live global stability metrics rolled calmly for the first time in weeks. Green indicators replaced emergency red alerts. Synchronization variance remained stable. Regional routing normalized. The orchestration engine was breathing correctly again, not because someone forced speed into it, because engineers were finally allowed to respect its limits. Lena stood watching the data for several moments in silence. Beautiful system, still worth saving. That mattered. One junior developer approached hesitantly from nearby support stations. "You're Lena Mercer?" She nodded once. The young engineer looked almost embarrassed. "I just wanted to say, most of us knew." "Knew what?" "That they were wrong about you." The words landed strangely, not triumphant, just human. Lena smiled softly. "Infrastructure doesn't care who gets credit," she said, "only whether people listen before things break." The junior engineer nodded, like someone trying to memorize a lesson expensive enough to matter later. Somewhere beyond the rain-streaked windows, helicopters crossed slowly over the river, while the city carried on beneath gray skies and cautious headlines. Traffic lights changed, cafes filled, trains arrived late for ordinary reasons instead of international outages. Life always resumes faster than reputations do. Around noon, Daniel Cho arrived carrying a thin legal folder beneath one arm. He looked more rested than during their first call, though only slightly. "Good news," he said. Those words became suspicious recently. A faint smile crossed his face. "The final regulatory review confirmed no misconduct on your part." Lena accepted that with quiet calm. She had never feared investigation. Documentation protects people who tell the truth carefully enough. Daniel continued, "The board also approved your revised licensing structure." There it was. Not revenge, not destruction, resolution. The orchestration engine would remain operational under a transparent international licensing framework with mandatory engineering oversight protocols attached. No rush deployments. No executive override authority without documented infrastructure approval. In simpler terms, the people building the system would finally have legal power to stop reckless decisions. Amazing how many disasters become avoidable once expertise gains permission to say no. Daniel handed her the folder. Inside sat finalized agreements, oversight signatures, regulatory confirmations, and clipped neatly at the back, the original unfinished patent assignment email. Lena stared at it for a moment. Such a small thing. One incomplete attachment chain, one ignored legal warning, one detail dismissed because someone powerful assumed intelligence could be rushed the same way presentations were. Entire corporations sometimes collapse through tiny fractures first. Daniel watched her carefully. "You kept it?" "Yes." "Why?" Lena looked through the conference room glass toward the engineering floor below. People moved between desks carrying laptops and cables and coffee cups. Ordinary workers rebuilding ordinary stability after extraordinary arrogance nearly destroyed it. Then she answered quietly, "Because systems fail slowly before they fail publicly." Daniel said nothing after that. He didn't need to. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the city in long golden reflections, turning office windows into sheets of fire. For the first time in weeks, the headquarters tower no longer looked like a stranded ship. Just a building, just glass and steel and people trying again. Lena gathered her notebook from the conference table before leaving. The same notebook she carried into the AI team meeting the morning Victor Hale called her too slow for the future. Funny sentence. The future arrived anyway, just not in the direction he expected. As she walked toward the elevators, conversations continued behind her. Keyboards clicked. Systems hummed steadily. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed for the first time all day. No applause followed her departure, no dramatic final speech, only the quiet rhythm of competent people finally being allowed to do their jobs properly, and somehow that felt far more powerful.